Okay, this is section 8.1, Properties of Exponents. So we've already talked quite a bit about exponents. First, we're just going to do a little quick review. We already know how to write y times y times y times y in exponential form. We know we'd write y to the 1, 2, 3, 4th power. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some of the properties of exponents. Now the first one is called the product of powers. And whenever you use the product of powers, you're going to be adding the exponents, but it's really important that you remember that the bases must be the same. So remember, when we talk about an exponent, if I have x to the 3rd power, x is my base and 3 is my exponent. Okay, so I'm just going to be adding the exponents when I look at these. So let's take a look at x squared times x to the 5th. Well, 5 plus 2 gives me 7, so I know that that is x to the 7th. Another way to think of x squared times x to the 5th would be x squared is x times x to the 5th would be x times x times x times x times x. So you would add up all the x's that you have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, x to the 7th. Now the same thing works when you're talking about, if you've got a base of 5 in this case, I can still add my exponents. 5 to the 3rd times 5 squared, well, that's the same thing as 5 to the 5th power. So that's 5 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. And this would be something I would probably plug into my calculator. We'll look at this in class. So when I plug in 5 to the 5th power, that's the same thing as 3,125. Now let's take a look at this next one. I have negative 2 times negative 2 to the 4th power. Okay, now this first one has an exponent. I just don't see it. Remember, math people don't like to write that exponent of 1 because it doesn't change anything. So when I add my exponents, I have negative 2 to the 1st and I have negative 2 to the 4th. So that's the same thing as negative 2 to the 5th power. So I can tell right away that my answer is going to be negative because I have an odd number of negative numbers. Because I have negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. When I plug that into my calculator, I get negative 32. Now be careful when you plug this into your calculator. One thing you'll need to do is make sure that you enter it with the parentheses, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in class. Now this next one is going to see if you're paying attention. I have 2x squared y cubed times 5x to the 4th y squared. Well, I'm going to multiply my numbers together. So 2 times 5 is going to give me 10. X squared times x to the 4th. I'm going to add those exponents because I'm multiplying. They have like bases. It's going to give me x to the 6th. Y cubed times y squared is going to give me y to the 5th. Okay, now if you didn't quite see where I got all this from, let's start over. So I have 2, because I'm multiplying, parentheses beside each other like that mean I'm multiplying, so 2 times 5 times x squared times x to the 4th times y cubed times y squared. 2 times 5 gives you 10. X squared times x to the 4th gives you x to the 6th. y cubed times y squared gives you y to the 5th. Okay, now another property of exponents we have is a power of a power. Now you've got to be really careful with these because they're similar. Now this tells me if I have a to the m power, close parentheses, all raised to the n, that I'm going to multiply those two exponents together. So on this first example, I have y squared to the 4th power. That's another way of saying that I have y squared 4 times y squared times y squared times y squared. I have 4 of those y squareds. When I add up my exponents, 2, 4, 6, 8, I get y to the 8th power. Or if I want to take a little shortcut, if I know my rules, I can say, oh, I have y squared to the 4th power. That's 2 times 4, so that is y to the 8th. Now I have 3 cubed to the 2nd power. Well, when I'm solving this one, I can say, well, oh, that's 2 times 3 is 6. So I have 3 to the 6th power. And when I multiply that out or plug that in my calculator, that's equivalent to 729. Now this last one is a little bit different because now I have xy squared to the 3rd power. That means I have 3 of these xy squareds. So you're going to write it. Okay, I have x y squared times x y squared times xy squared. Well, how many x's do I have? 3. So that's x cubed. Y squared, I have 2, 4, 6. So I get x cubed y to the 6th. Now another way I could realize this is I could say, oh, well, x has an exponent of 1. X to the 1st power cubed, oh, that's x cubed, because 1 times 3 is 3. Y squared, 2 times 3 is 6. Y to the 6th. So it's all in how you're comfortable looking at it. Okay, last one, power of a product. Now when we're looking at these, once again you just have to slow down and just take your time and look. Now I could say that I had 6 squared times 5 squared, which would give me 36 times 25. I'd multiply that and I would say, okay, that's 900. Or I could say, well, 6 times 5 is 30, so I have 30 squared. And 30 squared is 900. Okay, now my next one, I have 4yz cubed. So remember, this 4 is multiplied by y, which is multiplied by z. So I'm going to multiply the exponent of each of these variables and also my constant. So 4 to the 1st power times 3, or to the 3rd power, that gives me 4 cubed. Multiply my exponents, 1 times 3, so that gives me y cubed. My z has an exponent of 1 times 3, so that gives me z cubed. Which when I do that, I get 64 y cubed z cubed. Now the next one, this 3 has an exponent of 1. 3 times 1, so I have 3 cubed. X has an exponent of 3. 3 times 3, that gives me 9, so x to the 9th power. y squared, times 3 gives me y to the 6th. 3 cubed is going to give me 27, x to the 9th, y to the 6th. Now these last two are a little tricky. This difference is very subtle. It's only the location of the parentheses. For this one I have negative 2w squared. So I really have negative 2 squared w squared. Negative 2 in parentheses squared is going to give me a positive 4. So I have 4w squared. Now this next one, my negative is out. So I'm going to bring my negative over. Then I have 2 squared w squared. So I've dropped down my negative. 2 squared gives me 4. And then I have w squared. That's going to be something that we're going to be working on in class quite a bit because we really need to be comfortable with that. So this is just a warm-up to get you started. Thanks and have a good night.